18. Aladdin didn't bother to greet his mother when she returned. "What did the Sultan say?" he asked eagerly. Maman set her cloth-wrapped bundle down. "The Sultan said the princess is to marry the vizier's son, and he is building a magnificent palace for her. You are too late, my son. I told you she would only bring hurt and heartbreak." A magnificent palace, where had Aladdin heard those words before? Not from his mother, surely. It wasn't until he sat down to the noon meal with his mother, the remains of the royal repast the jinn had brought for them the previous night, that he remembered it was the jinn who'd mentioned palaces. And how he could build them. "Maman, I need you to go back to court and speak to the Sultan." She stared at him. "Did you not hear what I said? She is marrying someone else as soon as the palace is finished. Did you lose your wits out in the desert and bring back madness in its place?" Aladdin laughed. He did feel a little giddy, but only because he could feel happiness in his grasp. Maram had a chance at freedom. Marriage to the vizier's son would grant her that. All she needed was a suitable palace, a palace he now had the power to provide, thanks to Gwandoya. "No, Maman. I brought something far more valuable with me. Do you recall the lamp you tried to clean last night? It is no ordinary lamp. It contains a jinn." She shuddered. Jinn are unholy creatures, traitorous magicians who deserve to die for their crimes, but the Sultan they pretended to serve was merciful and let them live on in slavery instead. "If that lamp contains a jinn, you had better throw it into a deep well, where it can no longer harm you." "I shall do it myself." She rose and looked about her. Aladdin was doubly glad he'd hidden the lamp. "No, Maman. I shall deal with the lamp. I need you to speak to the Sultan. Do you still have the gift?" Maman waved irritably at the bundle. "I wish I did not, for it is a cumbersome thing." "Give it to the Sultan, as I asked you to this morning. Beg him to grant me a private audience tomorrow morning, when I will bring another gift, more sizable than the first." Silently, he prayed that the jinn had not lied about his abilities. If he had, then at least Aladdin would have the garden. That was something at least. Maman pushed her dish away. "I am no longer hungry. I will go now, for the sooner we put an end to this folly, the better. I ask only one thing. If the Sultan refuses to see you, will you forget about the princess and pursue more sensible things? There are plenty of merchants' daughters in the city who would happily agree to marry a handsome boy like you. I would like grandchildren." No merchant's daughter would spare him a second glance, Aladdin knew, and nor should any princess either. If the Sultan did grant him an audience, Aladdin would need to dress like he belonged in the palace. More to ask for. He hoped it would not be too much. His mother departed for the palace, grumbling as long as she was in sight. Aladdin slipped back into the house and shut the door. "Kaveh, is my mother correct? Are all jinn evil?" Kaveh burst from the ring in a flash of blinding blue light. "What have I ever done to you that you call me evil?" he demanded. Aladdin cast his mind back, trying to recall his mother's exact words. "Maybe not evil. Just traitorous." "Are you a traitor?" Kaveh's dark eyes burned. "There was once a sultan who called me that. Now he was evil in the worst sense of the word. Half the kingdom wanted him dead, me included. I led the rebellion that brought the palace down on his head, crushing him beneath the stone. His successor, a man who had fanned the flames of our rebellion to white-hot heat, only to reap more benefits from it than anyone else, was my judge. He could not risk another rebellion, he said, so all traitors must be punished. Many of my men were executed, and my family had perished at the old sultan's hands, so I stood alone, the last of all of them. I expected death, but he saw fit to grant me life. A lifetime of servitude, as a servant to the ring, a punishment reserved for magic wielders who betray their rulers. I believe he meant it as a gift to me, but a warning to everyone else that he would not tolerate treachery, for I had pledged my loyalty to the Sultan before him. Who or what do you serve? Kaveh let out a weary sigh. I am the servant of the ring you wear, remember? As long as you wear it, I serve you. At what cost to me? A new respect dawned in Kaveh's eyes. You must wear it always, for I will pass to the ring's new owner, should you lose it. But other than that, no, I bear the cost of my servitude. The spells I cast come from the magic in my blood I am bound to shed in your service and anyone else who wears the ring. What about the djinn of the lamp? Kaveh shrugged. He is bound as I am. If you wish to know his crimes, you must ask him, for I do not know. Both of us are bound to use our magic to serve our masters, and perform whatever magic they wish of us if we can. What can you do? I can move things with magic, or make things unseen. I could carry you through the desert if you commanded it, or make you invisible. But if you were to ask me to enchant this princess so that she falls deeply in love with you, that is something I cannot do. I have no aptitude for seduction magic. And the other djinn? Kaveh glared at something over Aladdin's shoulder. Why don't you ask him? He's been listening to every word we say, but only now does he make an appearance. You should probably consider yourself honored, for his previous master had to polish his lamp before he'd deign to help him, and even then his gifts were tainted. Aladdin turned and found the second djinn standing behind him. He still towered over them both, but he evidently didn't feel the need to be as impressive as he had yesterday. Did Aladdin imagine it, or was there some sadness behind the djinn's otherwise impassive expression? Servant of the lamp, you said you can build me a palace. In the blink of an eye, you said. Is it true? Aladdin demanded. I did not. A palace I can build, but it will take at least a night to truly be worthy of being called a palace. Aladdin nodded. Then I wish you to build a palace beside the one where the Sultan resides, yet more magnificent than the Sultan's. It must have. He struggled to think of anything he knew a palace should have. He'd never been inside one before. A bathhouse befitting a princess. Like the ancient one near the city gates. So that Princess Maram may bathe whenever she wishes without having to leave home. The djinn's eyes widened. The palace is not for you? I wish that it could be, but no. This palace will be my gift to Princess Maram, to celebrate her marriage. The djinn bowed low. It shall be done, master. By dawn you shall have your palace. He vanished. If I didn't know better, I'd say the man is half in love with your princess too, Kaveh said. He had a strange look in his eye. I wouldn't trust him if I were you. Says one traitor of another, Aladdin returned. Too hastily perhaps, for he agreed with Kaveh. The nameless djinn had many secrets he had not yet shared to be trusted fully yet, if ever. Kaveh bowed his head. I betrayed an evil man and I do not regret it. I would do it again. But I have served many sultans and princes since, and I have never been tempted to turn traitor again. Sometimes a man must break his own vows to do what is honorable. But the servant of the lamp, I do not know his crime or who he betrayed. Some traitors dishonor their liege with every breath. Aladdin nodded. Sage words from a man who by the sound of things had lived far longer than a normal man. Tomorrow he would have his answer. But in the meantime, can you make sure the palace includes a place for your garden? I would like to see it in all its glory, laid out for the princess. Kaveh bowed and attempted to imitate the other djinn's tone. It shall be done, master. He laughed. Those jewels never looked right underground. By the time I am done, your garden shall sparkle in the sun like the treasure it is. You deserve it, and this princess too. Aladdin wanted to believe him, but he didn't dare. Not yet. 19. "The Sultan, Your Highness," a maid announced. Maram dropped her embroidery and rose to her feet. "Father! What an unexpected surprise!" He smiled. "I have something that will surprise even you, I think, for I find it so unbelievable I must show you to be certain I have not imagined it all." He pulled off his jeweled turban and scratched his head, a sure sign that this was no official visit. Maram ordered refreshments and settled her father in the place of honor, before taking her place across from him. "I feel like a child waiting for a bedtime story," she admitted. "Will you tell your tale, father?" He sipped from his cup, then set it down. "I hardly know where to begin. After you left this morning, I held my usual audience. The petitions were so dull I found myself falling into a doze. If it weren't for Ali at my side, I suspect I might have snored. But he is a loyal vizier who would never let me do such a thing. An hour ago, I decided I wanted to retire, and opened my mouth to say so. Yet as I raised my eyes, they met the gaze of a woman who refused to look away. I fancied those dark eyes seemed to accuse me of something, though I knew not what. Instead of signaling an end to the audience, I told Ali I would see one last petitioner, her. When the guards brought her forward, at first I thought they were mistaken. She threw herself face down before the dais, barely daring to say a word for some time. Long enough for me to see she wore mourning black, but both her veil and gown were so well worn it had faded to grey. Cheap stuff too, like she was one of the poorest in the city. What could one such as her wish to accuse me of? Curiosity baited me, so I commanded her to speak. Father drained his cup and indicated he wanted it refilled. She raised herself onto her knees, and I found myself staring into those same eyes, but perhaps I had imagined the accusation I thought I'd seen before. Instead, now she seemed resigned. She laid a bundle at my feet and begged me to accept her son's gift. Father waved a servant forward. The gift, if indeed that was what she carried, filled her arms, and she seemed relieved to set it down beside Maram. "Is this it?" Maram asked, her hand hovering over the coarse cloth wrapping the item. Father nodded. Maram twitched back a corner of the cloth, then gasped in surprise. She peeled away the wrappings until she had revealed the whole thing, though she didn't dare touch it. To touch it would be to spoil its magnificence. The jeweled thing looked like a blackberry bush from the cold climates far to the north, with ripe fruit begging to be picked and flowers promising more for tomorrow. And so lifelike, whoever had crafted this knew the real thing. Why, she could almost taste the delicious sweetness on her tongue, a delight she had not known for far too long. She reached out to touch a berry, the reassuringly cold jewel reminding her that this cunning creation was not real. "Who made this?" "I do not know, for she did not say. All she said was that it was a gift from her son." Maram's eyes met her father's. Who is her son, who can afford to part with such a priceless gift? And why does his mother wear cheap widow's weeds when he has the coin for such magnificence? "I will find out on the morrow, for I have invited the man to a private audience with me." Maram blew out her breath in a rush. Disappointment clouded her face. "Is that all you have to tell me?" Father laughed. "Indeed it is. Like the audiences of the legendary storytellers of old, you must wait another day to find out what happens next." He rose to depart. "Wait, father, you forgot your shrub." She cradled the treasure in her arms and offered it up to him. He smiled. "You keep it. I see in your eyes you appreciate its beauty truly, like your mother would have. Consider it a wedding gift, for something tells me it should be." He left, but Maram scarcely noticed, so busy was she in examining her new work of art. For that's what it was. A precious thing, why would anyone part with it, unless they needed to sell it to live? What kind of man gave such a gift? She wished she'd thought to ask her father to be present at tomorrow's audience, so that she might see the man for herself. But father would have asked her to be there if he'd wanted her presence. He valued her opinion, and if he meant to keep this man at his court, she would meet him soon enough. And when she did, Maram resolved to ask him who his jeweler was, so that she might give the jeweler's name to Hassan and insist he create a garden of such things in her palace. One such shrub would bankrupt him for sure. Best not to have Hassan assassinated yet then. First he had to build her a ruinously expensive palace. With emphasis on the ruin. 20. Master, your palace is complete, Aladdin heard the jinn say. He wrenched his eyes open and wished he hadn't. The pre-dawn light told him it was far too early an hour for anyone to be about. But he remembered Kavere's warning, so he rose and dressed. Show it to me then, he said. The jinn waved his arm and a portal opened up in the east wall through which he could see the darkness of some other place entirely, instead of the rising sun he knew would be hitting that wall. The jinn bowed. After you, master. Reluctantly, Aladdin stepped through the wall, from his mother's tiny house to a cool, spacious hall. Oh, this was exactly the sort of place where Maram belonged. Mosaic tiles stretched up the walls and across the ceiling, mirroring the night sky over the desert. Even the tiles underfoot were the exact color of the desert sands. The jinn said nothing as Aladdin crept from room to room, unable to keep himself from staring. Having never seen the Sultan's palace, he hoped this would be good enough. It was certainly better than anything he'd seen in the prince's apartments in Tasnim. The bathhouse was an exact replica of the one where he'd first met Maram, including the towel storage alcove where he'd hidden. The jinn had not forgotten towels either, the soft cloths were piled high, waiting for their royal mistress. Aladdin took a deep breath and lost himself in memories of that day. He'd spent one perfect day with her, and it would have to be enough. She would live here with her new husband, and be so happy she never thought of Aladdin again. You must see your audience chamber, master, the jinn said. Aladdin opened his mouth to say that no part of this palace was his, but there would be time for that later. Instead, he followed the jinn up a curving flight of stairs to the level above. The jinn had timed his entrance perfectly. As Aladdin stepped out of the archway into the hall, the morning sun hit the windows in a blaze of magnificence. For unlike the other windows in the city, these were closed in panes of glass and translucent gemstones. A veritable rainbow of colors cascaded down the walls to the floor, before dancing up to the ceiling from cleverly placed mosaic tiles that reflected light everywhere. A room designed to dazzle, which indeed it did. Aladdin lifted a hand to his eyes, lest he be blinded by so much brightness. Now show me the garden. Allow me, Kaveh said, leading Aladdin down the stairs again and into a courtyard in the heart of the palace. At first glance, he'd created what appeared to be a real garden, but when the morning sun touched the trees, it shattered that illusion into 1,000 beams of light. Each berry and flower seemed to take on its own glow, glittering in harmony with each leaf and trunk, but it was nowhere near as blinding as the audience hall above. This place held a welcoming glow, inviting him to linger a little longer. Oh, if only he could, but this place was not for the likes of him. It would house Maram and her new husband. It's perfect, Aladdin said, and was surprised to see both jinns swell with pride at the compliment. I have another request. Is there any way I can see Maram's betrothed? Seeing the man who had won the heart of the lovely princess would remind Aladdin why he would never be good enough for her, or this palace. I shall bring him here directly, the jinn said, opening a hole in the wall. No. I don't want him to know I'm there. I want to see him in his home, where I imagine he'd be asleep now, Aladdin clarified. Kaveh bowed. I'd be honored to help you. Invisibility is my speciality. Leaving the other jinn behind with his handiwork, Kaveh and Aladdin made their way through the near-empty streets to the vizier's house, where the princess's soon-to-be husband lived. They entered the house and dodged between servants readying the house for the day. No one spared them a glance, buoying Aladdin's hopes that Kaveh had made them truly invisible. The best bedchamber is this way, Carve said softly, leading Aladdin upstairs. Don't worry, they can't hear us. How do you know where it is? Have you been here before? Aladdin asked. This house has belonged to a long line of viziers. The man in office may change, but the house does not. One day, Aladdin would ask Carve how old he was. Today was not that day though, as he fought to catch his breath while they hurried up the stairs. Aladdin heard quiet sobbing, then a smack of flesh on flesh followed by a pained cry, like a child being spanked. Curiosity made him follow the sound into a grand bedchamber, but the scene he found made him wish he hadn't. A semi-naked slave girl, judging by what remained of her torn clothes, squirmed under a naked man who evidently took great pleasure in her tears and cries of pain as he bedded her. He clenched his fingers around her breast, squeezing until she let out a little scream, then backhanded her across the face, adding what would be another bruise to match her two blooming black eyes. You like that, don't you, slut of a sultan's daughter? Answer me, the man demanded. He hit her again twice, eliciting more cries of pain. Answer me. Finally the weeping girl whimpered, Yes, master. Your touch honors me. Louder, he insisted, slapping her face again. Her voice rose to a shriek as she repeated the words, over and over, at his command, each sentence punctuated by another blow from the brute. Aladdin wanted to help the girl, but what could he do? He was half the man's size, and there were dozens of servants who would come to his assistance. Why weren't they coming to help the girl? For surely they could hear her. He stuck his head out of the open doorway. Sure enough, a steady stream of servants filed past, intent on their tasks for the day. The girl screamed, and Aladdin saw a serving girl flinch. She stumbled, then caught herself and continued past, hugging her arms to her chest. Arms bruised almost black in places, Aladdin noticed, matching her own fading black eyes. All the female servants bore the marks of this monster, he realized. All were young and pretty, or would be if not for the bruises. No older women worked here. Is that the vizier? Aladdin asked. Even as the words left his lips, he knew they could not be true. The brute had not looked old enough to be the father of an adult son, old enough to marry Maram. Dread curled a cold tendril around his heart. No, that is his son Hassan, who will soon marry the princess, Carve said sadly. Aladdin swore. Not while I live, he won't. If he lays so much as a finger on her perfect skin, I will kill him myself. How did a humble spinner's son stop the daughter of the sultan from marrying whoever she wished? The sultan would not listen to him. Perhaps if he was the vizier's equal or a prince. A bubble of inspiration burst in Aladdin's head, brighter than dawn in his own audience chamber. For it would be. Carve, go to the alley behind the entrance to the marketplace. There you will find a number of men waiting to be offered work. Laborers, all of them. Tell them you come from me, and you will pay them a week's wages if they meet me at the gates of the city an hour before my audience with the sultan. What will you be doing? Persuading the servant of the lamp to make me look like the richest prince in the world. One who deserves not only that palace but the princess too. Carve grinned. That's the spirit. I still haven't seen this princess of yours yet. 21. Leave me, Maram commanded her attendants, and they did, leaving her alone in the bathhouse. Except, she wasn't really alone. You may approach, she said softly. A dark-clad figure melted out of the shadows. I was informed you might have a job for me. Maram turned a seductive smile on the hooded man. She did not need to see his face as long as he could see hers. There is no might about it. If you are indeed the best assassin in the city, then I have a job for you. There is no assassin better than me, the man said. Maram knew it was a lie, but this man probably did not. The best assassin she knew was out of the city, with no definite return date, so second best must do. Then tell me. If someone paid you to assassinate the Sultan, how would you do it? She asked. The man shook his head. I would not take that job. What about the vizier? He is an old man. Old men are prone to clumsiness. If old age does not carry him off, perhaps he might stumble down some stairs or trip and hit his head. The stories Maram had heard about this man were true. He was clever enough to make cold-blooded murder appear like an accident. And what about the vizier's son? He is young and strong, but death lurks in the most unlikely places. One of his servants might slip poison into his wine, for it is well known that he is a hard master. What if someone asked you to kill a princess? You toy with me, Your Highness. I could kill you now where you stand, for you carry no weapon. By the time your servants came to your assistance, you would be dead. He bowed his head. But an assassin with my skills has the freedom to choose which jobs he takes. And I would not wish to rob the world of your beauty, so you are safe from me. I do not kill women. She had heard this too. What poison would Hassan's servants choose, I wonder, she said. The assassin produced a small pouch. A little will send him to sleep, but enough will make sure he does not wake up. Maram nodded, satisfied. Then I will pay you for it now, and on the night before my wedding, I ask you to meet me here once more, to complete the job. She held out a jingling purse. He exchanged his pouch for the purse, then paused to count his coins. This is more than my usual fee. You will receive the same again when your job is complete. He bowed deeply. As Your Highness commands. He melted into the shadows once more. When she was certain he'd gone, Maram peeped into the pouch. She almost laughed. He'd given her opium, a drug she'd used more often than any other. A waste of good coin, but never mind. She had no doubt Hassan used the stuff too, so it would be no surprise if anyone found the pouch in his house. Or in hers. She left the bathhouse deep in thought, only to find her guards on the steps outside, holding back a crowd. What's going on? Maram asked, craning her neck to see past her men. There's some sort of procession in the street. Everyone's lined up to see some prince come to visit your father. She wasn't sure which of her men had spoken, for they were too intent on the street below to turn when they spoke to her. Gross disrespect she could have the man killed for, she knew, but Maram understood men better than most. Curiosity was a powerful thing, and she had no desire to inspire enmity in her father's guards. If she killed Hassan, she would need them to be sympathetic to her, or they might suspect. A gold coin to the first man to tell me the prince's name and where he comes from, she cried, pulling the coin from her purse. A shout came from the crowd, the Prince of Tasnim. More shouts followed the first, but none seemed to know more than the name of his principality. It was enough. She handed the coin to one of her guards, who saw it went to its rightful owner. She need not have bothered. The prince's entourage appeared then, gaudily dressed men who threw fistfuls of coins into the crowd. Maram did not recognize the livery, for that was what it was. These richly dressed men were the prince's servants. After them came dancers, whirling in unison so that their veils and skirts spun like tops. Finally, there were ranks of what she thought were porters, if a lowly porter could afford the silks these men wore. On their heads they carried dishes piled high with gems much like those she'd seen on the jeweled shrub her father had shown her. Behind the porters rode a man on a horse so pale it appeared white, something no horse could in the desert, for the sands colored everything they touched. But they could not touch this animal, as fine as any in her father's stable. The man, no, the prince, for he wore a crown nestled in the folds of his turban, threw coins into the crowd too, earning a rousing cheer from everyone as he passed. Maram tried to get a glimpse of his face, to see if he was one of the princes she knew, but the cheering, waving townspeople made that impossible. The prince passed, followed by another company of coin-throwing servants, and the crowd closed ranks behind him to join the parade to the palace. Maram cursed inwardly and waited a long time until the road cleared, before she commanded her men to clear a path for her to go home. Whoever this prince was, he'd intended to make a spectacle of himself, and she would soon know far more about him than she cared to. 22. When Aladdin prostrated himself before the Sultan, he had a sudden image of the Sultan commanding one of the guards to lop off his head before he could rise. No, he told himself. The Sultan was a wise and just ruler. He'd wait for Aladdin to speak and say something wrong before he executed him. Some reassurance. More than ever, Aladdin wanted to take to his heels and run home, but he knew he could not. He had to save Maram from that man. Rise, the Sultan commanded. Aladdin rose onto his knees. Your Majesty, in thanks for your kind invitation, I have brought you a gift. He waved Burke and his men forward. They laid their baskets of jewels at the Sultan's feet, then bowed again. The Sultan's eyes gleamed almost as brightly as the jewels he surveyed. Such a generous gift demands another in return. What would you ask of me, Prince of Tasnim? Kaveh's whispers in the crowd had reached the Sultan's ears then, as he promised. I ask for the Princess Maram's hand in marriage. The Sultan's eyebrows rose. But she is already betrothed to another. No, she was betrothed to a beast of a man who did not deserve her. So I have heard, but I understand there is a condition on the betrothal. Namely, her husband must build her a palace befitting such a priceless princess before the marriage can take place. He saw the Sultan open his mouth to respond, so Aladdin hastily added, I propose a contest between her betrothed and myself. Whoever can build a palace that meets with her approval first, will win her hand. If the vizier or his son were present, they would surely object, but the Sultan had granted Aladdin an audience alone, if the crowd he'd brought in his procession could be considered alone. The Sultan eyed him. My daughters are precious to me, especially Princess Maram. I would not bestow them lightly on a man I do not know. I will consider your proposal for a day, and give you my answer on the morrow. He gave a wave of dismissal to signal the end of the brief audience. Thank you, Your Majesty. But if I may add one thing, I took the liberty of building a palace beside your own which I had hoped would satisfy the princess. If you are of a mind to accept my proposal, I humbly request that Her Highness tell me how poorly I may have anticipated her wishes on the morrow. Aladdin held his breath. He had little hope that Maram would be present tomorrow, but if the Sultan denied that part of his request, he might be more inclined to accept the rest. We shall see. Indeed we shall, Aladdin thought, as he and his men backed out of the audience chamber. Tomorrow could not come too soon. 23. Maram stabbed the needle through her embroidery, wishing she'd chosen to attend court today instead of going to the bathhouse to meet with the assassin. Now she'd have to wait until her father retired for the day before she heard what the prince had said. Are you thinking of becoming an assassin? I've heard tales of men in the Far East who execute traitors by piercing them with 1,000 needles. Maram dropped the needle in surprise. Father? I have another gift for you today, but it will not fit in here. You must come with me if you wish to see it. A squad of guards waited outside and Maram hastily secured her veil, realizing they would be leaving the palace, for neither she nor her father required an escort so large within the palace grounds. Father filled her in as they walked. The prince had asked for her hand and promised her a palace, just as she'd asked for from Hassan. A palace he tells me he has already built, here, father said with a flourish as the building came into view. Maram's breath caught in her throat. How had she missed it this morning? Too intent on her thoughts, she supposed, as her men fought their way through the crush outside the palace. A second palace sat beside her father's, grand and gleaming in the sun. The open gates beckoned her in, and Maram could not refuse the elegant invitation. The scent of rose water reached her nostrils. Whoever owned the palace had seen fit to perfume the entrance steps, a delightful touch. As she stepped inside, she expected servants to come rushing forward to greet her and offer refreshments, yet there was no sound but the echo of her and her father's footsteps on the tiles. They were alone in this palace. A palace that easily outshone her father's. The tile floors were so perfectly smooth, they seemed to be made of a single piece of stone. Every room had a different ceiling mosaic, so lifelike it seemed she was staring up at the real sky and not a picture of it. And the bathhouse, tears sprang to her eyes to see her dreams made real in a way no man could have known she wanted, for she hadn't even told her father how much she wanted this. The bathhouse was as opulent as the rest of the palace, but it was also familiar. If the bathhouse she'd visited that very morning were made anew, then surely it would look like this. A copy of the place on the day it opened all those centuries ago, but no one could know such things. Shaking her head at the impossibility of what her eyes were telling her, Maram no longer knew what to think. "Come and look at the garden," her father called. Only now did Maram realize she stood alone in the bathhouse. Her father had ventured into the courtyard without her. A courtyard or a garden? Maram wasn't certain until she saw the light glint off what she'd taken for grass. No, the ground was covered in grass-colored tiles, while jeweled shrubs and trees dotted the courtyard like the harem gardens at home. A jeweled replica of the harem gardens, a place no prince had ever visited, for her brothers had been given their own garden for their boisterous play. The only men who had ever visited them were sultans, like her father, or traitors like her mother's lover, Amani. There was magic at work here. Magic meant to delight her, and her alone. Maram's mouth was unbearably dry. More than ever, she wished for a servant to offer her refreshment, but no one granted her wish. "Father, whoever this man is, whoever built this, I must meet him," she said. Because if he was even the slightest bit better than Hassan, she would scream her yes to his proposals before he could repeat them to her. A shape stepped out of the shadows. A shape wearing a crown in the folds of his turban. The prince threw himself face down on the green tiles. "I am honored by the presence of such a beautiful princess and her father in my humble home." Maram glanced around, only to find her father nowhere in sight. Had he gone, leaving her alone with this man? It seemed he had. Maram took a deep breath. "Rise, Prince of Tasnim, for I am the one who is honored. Why would a man I barely know offer me such a magnificent gift?" "Because Hassan does not deserve you." The prince rose stiffly to his feet, only to lose his turban partway up. It clanged to the tiles crown first and rolled away. She couldn't hide her smile. "And you do?" "No," he said, raising his head to meet her eyes. "But I could think of no other way to free you of both slavery and your betrothal to him." Maram's breath caught in her throat and she couldn't seem to draw another one. This couldn't be. It couldn't. Yet. "Aladdin," she gasped. 24. Aladdin stood invisible by Kaveh's side, watching the Sultan and Princess Maram marvel over the palace the two jinn had built. Now Aladdin truly believed she was as precious to her father as he'd said. The Sultan spent more time watching his daughter's reactions than looking at the place. She meant more to him than whatever diplomatic assistance she provided to the court. For a moment, he wished he'd told the Sultan about Hassan instead of creating such an elaborate scheme. He would never give the daughter he loved to that man if he truly knew what Hassan would do to her. "What? Did you spot a mistake in the tiles?" Kaveh demanded. "Why do you look so miserable?" "I should have asked the Sultan to call off the engagement, not offered a new one. She will see through this for sure." He waved at his silk clothes. They felt so slippery against his skin he worried they would slip right off and leave him naked. Not that it mattered when he was unseen, but... "Don't be daft," Kaveh snapped. "Once the Sultan's given his word to the vizier, he can't break the engagement, unless a better offer comes along. You made him the only offer he could accept. And once he sees the audience chamber, he will. But the princess will hate me for trying to deceive her. I'd hate me for making a bargain with her father without knowing I had her consent first. If there was a way I could speak to her before her father. Carvey nodded. Here she comes. I'll take him up to see the audience chamber, and you take a moment with your princess. He strode across the courtyard and materialized on the steps to the upper levels. He bowed deeply. Your Majesty, my master bade me to greet you and show you anything you wish to see. I would recommend the audience chamber. The Sultan cut him off. I had begun to think the palace was empty. Let us see this chamber. He headed up with Carvey. Father, whoever this man is, whoever built this, I must meet him, Maram said, stepping into the sun. She blinked, blinded. Aladdin could not have asked for a better opportunity than this. He threw himself at Maram's feet. At her command, he rose, taking his time to meet her eyes and the complete lack of recognition he expected to see there. A princess would not remember a poor boy she'd met in the bathhouse. Aladdin? His name was music on her lips. He wanted to sink to his knees again and give thanks to whatever deity had helped him this time. But he forced himself to stay on his feet, for she had ordered it. How did you manage to build such a place? So lavish, so perfect, so fast, she asked. When I last saw you, you hadn't eaten for days, yet now. She ran a hand down his tunic. So that's why royalty wore silk. The feel of her fingers through it was pure bliss. Aladdin wanted to moan in pleasure, but he knew he only had a moment before her father returned. I cannot tell you, for you would not believe me. I scarcely believe it myself. What I can tell you is that I ventured out into the desert and found a priceless treasure. A treasure that made all this possible, though it nearly killed me to return here. It's for you, princess. All of it. If there is anything you wish changed, name it, and it shall be done. You don't even need to accept me, the palace is my gift to you. All I ask in return is that you don't marry that brute Hassan. Maram's eyes hardened. Why would I not want the man who risked his life for me to give me this, to save me from that brutish fool? I've been to the bathhouse every day, sent men out looking for you, by all that's holy. She tore the veil from her head and threw it on the tiles. Maram shook her hair off her face, a night-dark river Aladdin longed to stroke, then wrapped her arms around Aladdin and kissed him. She tasted sweeter than before, more intoxicating than the finest wines in Tasnim, and more arousing than any of the erotic murals in the prince's harem. The softness of her body in his arms made him wonder if he truly had died and gone to paradise after all. Maram! At the Sultan's exclamation, Aladdin reluctantly released his angel and held his arms out wide in surrender. Maram waited to finish one last kiss before she unwound her arms from Aladdin. What, father? I'm going to marry this man. He'll see more than my face and hair soon enough. She bent to retrieve her veil, trailing her fingers across Aladdin's groin. Soon enough, she repeated softly. Aladdin's cheeks grew as heated as he could hardly face the Sultan while he had a tent in his accursed silk pants. A normal tunic would have hidden everything, but in this finery, he forced himself to retrieve his turban and hold it before his groin to hide the effect Princess Maram had on him. She winked as she wound her veil around her hair, leaving her face uncovered. Prince Aladdin wishes to know if any improvements should be made to his palace. It appears perfect to me, but you have seen more of it than I have. The Sultan stared from Aladdin to Maram. What about Hassan? She frowned. What about him, father? I doubt he has laid so much as a single stone on the palace he promised to build, but if I'm wrong, I will happily compare the two. We already know who will be the victor in any competition. What will I tell his father? Maram shrugged. Tell him you received a better offer from a prince. He's your advisor. If he advised you to accept a vizier's son over a prince, he'd be a fool, and out of a job. You needn't tell him right away. I will need at least 4 weeks before my wedding. You'll have some time. 4 weeks? Aladdin blurted out. Maram smiled mischievously. 4 weeks until the wedding, yes. It will take that long for my dress. A royal wedding is worth celebrating. She winked. Don't worry, my prince. I shall have my things moved to your palace tonight. From this moment I am yours. Oh, how he longed for that to be true. But it was not. No, you and this palace will not be mine until we are married. Until then, this palace belongs to you alone, princess. I will stay with my mother, but, with your permission, I shall visit you if you wish. Maram's shock brightened into a smile. Oh, I do wish. The Sultan coughed. It seems my daughter has made her decision, and what father would argue with a woman in love? Shall we meet on the morrow, Prince Aladdin, or will you accept my answer now? Aladdin bowed. I will accept whatever your majesty is gracious enough to grant me. The Sultan laughed. My favorite daughter, it would seem. Just like her mother, I can refuse her nothing. But I will add one thing. His expression darkened. If you hurt her, if my daughter sheds a single tear because of you, I will have your head severed from your body so fast, you will not have time to blink in surprise before your heart stops beating. Aladdin met the Sultan's eye now, not a subject to his sovereign, but a future son-in-law to a protective father. If I ever cause harm to come to Princess Maram, I will offer my head to you myself, for I will deserve such a fate. He opened his mouth to ask what the Sultan would do to Hassan, but he'd taken his daughter's arm and already started walking away. Hassan no longer mattered. Maram would marry him and make Aladdin the happiest of men. I'd have risked killing myself crossing the desert for her too, Kaveh said fervently. You are one lucky man. Yes. Yes, he was. 25. When they returned to the Sultan's palace, Maram knew she would have a lot of questions to answer. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not care. She'd seen him, she'd kissed him, and by some incredible change of heart from fate, she'd get to keep him. Aladdin. The only man who'd ever touched her heart. The only man who kissed her like he cared how he touched her, not wanting to consume her in his own blazing passion. Oh, Aladdin had passion enough, she was certain of it, for she'd seen it in his eyes as he kissed her. But he didn't want to marry her for himself. Oh no. He wanted to save her from Hassan. One day she would tell him how she'd planned to save herself, but not until after they were married. She didn't want to frighten him. Then again, Aladdin was not some soft courtier, to be frightened by a woman who took her fate into her own hands. No, he was a man who would risk everything, even his own life, for the woman he loved. Her mouth became dry. Did he love her? He had not said so, but then he'd hardly had the chance to do so. Yet why else would he risk so much for her, if not for love? How do you know this man, and why have I never heard of him? Father demanded. Maram blinked. She'd been so lost in thought she hadn't realized they'd arrived in her private apartments, and they were alone. She pulled off her veil and shook out her hair. She would have to be careful, for her father thought Aladdin was a prince, and she had no desire to tell him otherwise. I met him once briefly. I liked him very much then, and I believe he liked me too, but as neither of us were in a position to marry at the time, I thought such a thing would never happen. Evidently I underestimated both his affection and his wealth. She blew out a breath. She would not make that mistake again. Aladdin was not a man to be underestimated at all. What about Hassan? Why would you agree to marry Hassan if you loved this man so much? Father persisted. Here was the crux of the matter. She was her mother's daughter, after all. I never intended to marry Hassan. He is a vicious brute who beats his servants and has wanted to do the same to me since the moment we met. I had hoped to bankrupt him by forcing him to build a palace that I would never be satisfied with. Then, when he was so deeply in debt he could no longer continue, perhaps he would give up his suit, and he'd be forced to release the servants he has abused for so long. Father's eyebrows rose so high they disappeared into his jeweled turban. How did I not know this about him? Maram lifted her shoulders in a delicate shrug. Perhaps only women gossip about such things, or perhaps he hides it well from anyone outside his household. But you sent him with me on a trading expedition, where he tried to turn me into his whore. He did not succeed and has hated me ever since. I had no idea you were unaware of his true nature, father. Though it didn't surprise her. Vizier Ali must have known and worked hard to conceal it from the Sultan. He frowned, evidently deep in thought. Maram let the silence build. Her father would fill it when he chose to. Finally he said, "So you don't wish to marry Hassan, but you do want this other man? This prince? He will make you happy." "Yes, father. Aladdin will make me happy. He already had. But he will take you away from me, to his own kingdom." Maram had never seen her father pout before, but he looked dangerously close to doing so now. "Father, I will make it my mission to make sure Aladdin likes it so much here in our city, that he never wants to leave his palace. You will have to travel a little further to see me, but not so far as you think." He nodded. "I'll summon Hassan and his father and tell them the news. They certainly won't be happy when they hear." No, they would not. Especially Hassan. "Can you wait until I have left the palace, father? I fear Hassan's anger will make him do something reckless when he hears the news." The Sultan smiled fondly. "Of course. I will wait 2 days, will you be ready then?" Maram nodded. She was so used to traveling, she and her servants could have her room stripped in an hour if need be, to catch the tide. But never before had she felt that leaving a room would change her life forever. Now there would be no returning from a future that was so unknown. Could anyone truly be ready for anything the future held? "I shall," she vowed. 26. All the way home, Aladdin should have been walking on air, but he couldn't help but worry. The man he'd seen this morning beating his slave would not like losing Maram. What man would? If another man, a real prince perhaps, were to appear in the palace and persuade the Sultan that he was a better match than either Aladdin or Hassan, Aladdin would not simply stand by and accept it. Not unless he truly believed someone could make Maram happier than he could. The moment he got home, he dug out the lamp and summoned the jinn. Without waiting for the jinn to ask for orders, Aladdin said, "I need you to protect the princess in the palace you built. She'll bring her own staff, I'm sure, but she'll need guards and I don't know what. And you. If all else fails, I need you to protect her." "As you command, master. If I may suggest." Aladdin looked up. The jinn wasn't normally any more helpful than he needed to be. Not like Kaveh. "Yes?" The jinn ducked his head. "I suggest placing the lamp in the palace treasury, so I will always be close by if Princess Maram needs me." Something in the jinn's tone made Aladdin suspicious. "You are not to speak to her, interact with her in any way or permit her to see you, unless her life depends upon it," Aladdin added. This didn't seem to upset the jinn at all. "Yes, master." Aladdin decided he must have imagined it. "If I may not speak to her, can you tell me if she liked the palace?" Aladdin hesitated for a moment, but he couldn't see any reason not to answer. "Yes, she did. So much that she agreed to marry me because of it." "Does she not reside in her father's palace?" "Of course she does. Then why would she want another? Aladdin squinted at the djinn. He sure had a lot of questions about Maram. Something about bankrupting the brute who expected to marry her. Not me, the other guy. The djinn roared with laughter. Oh, she is her mother's daughter. So ruled by passion, she would rather ruin a man than kill him outright. I would prefer a clean death myself. Feeling he was missing something that the djinn deliberately chose not to share, Aladdin told the djinn to hide in the lamp, so that he might take him to his new home in the palace. The princess's palace. In 4 short weeks it would be his too. He'd need to find a more suitable place for his mother as well. The tiny house they'd moved to after his father died had never felt like home, and he owed his mother more than this place. A palace of her own perhaps, or an apartment in Maram's. He'd ask her when he saw her. In the meantime, Aladdin made his way through the city. He'd persuaded Kaveh to find him some more suitable clothes than the embarrassing silk suit he'd worn for his triumphal entry into the city, and Kaveh had provided him with a fine linen tunic with matching turban and trousers. At first glance they were no different to his normal clothes, but Aladdin could feel the difference. There were coins that jingled in his pockets too, courtesy of the djinn who'd also filled the treasury in the palace with enough wealth to do him for several lifetimes. And all because he'd accepted a job from that madman, Gwandoya. Who could still be trying to recruit men to do his dirty work, Aladdin realized. He had to warn Burke and the others. He made his way to the alley where they would normally be, but the alley was empty. Of course, they'd done their day's work in the procession this morning. He hoped Kaveh had paid them well for it. None of them had recognized him in his finery, and he hadn't dared to climb down off his horse once he was on it so that he might speak to them. The beast had proved just as challenging to ride as a camel. Henceforth, Aladdin swore to walk on his own 2 feet wherever he went. And his feet would lead him back the alley on the morrow, for Burke deserved to know he'd been right about Gwandoya. When he arrived at the palace gates, he found a steady stream of servants carrying things from the Sultan's palace to Maram's, before returning for more. He found her in a set of apartments overlooking the garden. Why did you not choose the best bedchamber? He asked as he entered. Unless your father plans to move into your palace with you, you will be the highest-ranking inhabitant of the house. She laughed. Not so. You're royalty too, remember, I left the best apartment for you. Though I hope to be invited in there often. Every night, in fact. Her kiss didn't take him by surprise, but it seemed to melt things inside him that had no business melting. Princess, this palace is yours, and you are free to go wherever you wish. What about in here? She slid a hand under his tunic, then frowned as she encountered something hard. What is this? Not what she had hoped for, certainly. Aladdin pried the lamp from her fingers. It is a lucky talisman that has protected my house and now will protect yours. I'll just put it in the entry hall. He found a suitable alcove high on the wall, and tucked the lamp into the back of it. There. Now you will be safe. Oh, how fervently he hoped that would be the case. Now you can invite me to your chamber, Maram said. More than anything, he wanted to do just that. To take this beautiful woman and anything she offered. Not yet. It would be dishonorable to do so before we are married, Aladdin said with considerable regret. She laughed. I am not some blushing virgin, as you well know. We are promised, and I know you are a man of your word. I promise our nights together will be the greatest pleasure you have ever known. Aladdin swallowed. Every word was the truth, and yet. You may not be a virgin, but I am, and I fear my clumsiness will make you wish to break your promise. I am not worthy of you. Not yet. Her eyes mesmerized him like never before. What if I told you I knew a spell that could guarantee when you make love to the woman of your heart's desire, she will know nothing but pleasure at your touch? His mouth was too dry to speak. He tried twice before he had to clear his throat to get the words out. "Keep your spell for our wedding night, for you will need it then. Please, princess." She stared at him for a long time, then nodded. "All right. If you wish. I have never had to wait for a man before, and I find I do not like it. However, I believe you will be worth the wait, so I shall." If Aladdin looked at her for any longer, he would be lost in her eyes, and he would agree to anything she desired, for he desired it too. He bade her a hasty farewell and hurried out, before he could surrender to her. It was a long walk home, but he noticed little of it, for his thoughts were filled with Maram and their future nights together. The desert heat was cold in comparison. 27. For 2 days, Aladdin did not visit her, and it drove Maram mad. She'd seen him again and kissed him. She'd kissed him so many times he heated her blood near to boiling, and still he resisted her. Not even their betrothal was enough to bring him to her bed. If she didn't know better, she'd swear the man had seduction magic of his own, but she'd never met a man so frightened of intimacy before. Clumsy indeed. She'd known clumsy, and he wasn't. His every kiss was perfect, making love to him would be even more perfect. Yet still he did not come, and it was her turn to fear. Had she driven him away with her persistence? Or did he have other matters to attend to? For she knew he was no prince, not truly, so his money must come from somewhere. When she saw him next, she would ask about it, and this time she would not rest until she had her answer. Darkness crept over the city on the second day, dulling her spirits until Maram had scarcely any appetite for her evening meal. A cacophony of banging and shouting sounded outside, and Maram sent a maid to find out what was going on. Another maid came skidding into the room, wide-eyed. "Your Highness, he's here." So Aladdin surprised her servants, did he? "Send him in," Maram said, calling for a second place to be set at her table for her soon-to-be husband. The first one returned, laughing. "There is a madman outside, rattling a great bundle of new lamps all tied together, offering to trade new lamps for old. There is an old lamp in the entrance hall. I found it while I was cleaning. Shall I take it to him and see if he will truly trade it, as he says?" Maram no longer cared about whatever was going on outside. Fine, she said vaguely, combing her fingers through her hair. Did she have time to summon a servant with a comb to do a proper job? She had not expected Aladdin to come so late, and she did not want him to find her looking anything but her best. "What is this I hear that you are to marry some prince? You are promised to me." Hassan burst into the room, his eyes as wild as any madman outside. Maram cautiously rose to her feet, so that she might run if she needed to. "My father, the Sultan, controls my fate, as he rules over us all," she said slowly. There were no guards in her private chambers. Her only weapon was a small eating dagger, and even that lay on the table where she'd left it. "You're mine." "Mine?" Hassan spat, striding forward. Maram scuttled back, hoping she had judged the entrance to the gardens right. Once she reached the darkness, she could turn and run and perhaps hide. Her back hit the wall. Oh, by all that was holy, she had the worst luck. Maram edged to her left, closer to Hassan, but also closer to freedom. Not close enough. His meaty hands closed around her throat and choked off her air. "You belong to me, not some foreign prince." Color leached away from Maram's vision as she struggled to breathe. Hassan would kill her after all, and she and Aladdin would never, she'd never. "You dare to steal from me," a new voice roared. Hassan threw her to the floor, knocking the remaining breath from her lungs. Maram coughed and gasped and fought to stay conscious. She had to get to the knife. "She is my bride and no one else's," Hassan shouted back, storming back the way he'd come. Maram dragged herself across the floor and snatched the knife from the table. Thus armed, she subsided on the tiles, too exhausted to move any more just yet. But she had to. Had to get up, be ready to run or defend herself, because if she didn't, Hassan would kill her for sure. She drew in a great gulp of air, then another, and the second was somehow tainted with smoke. Fire! Faintly she could hear her servants screaming and the sound of running feet as they escaped the blaze now filling her palace with smoke. She coughed hard, tears blurring her vision. Maram grabbed the table and hauled herself into a sitting position, still coughing as the smoke grew too thick for her to see. She must have hit her head, she decided, because she couldn't be seeing what she thought was before her. The smoke coalesced into a giant blue man, who faced off against Hassan as though the two were about to fight. Kill the miserable thief. No one steals from Gwandoya, the unfamiliar male voice said. Maram blinked, her vision clearing just in time to see the blue man clasp his hands together and bring them down on Hassan's head. Hassan's head burst like an overripe melon, bits of flesh splattering on the tiles, before his headless body collapsed amid the gore. "Oh my God," Maram breathed, then clapped a hand over her mouth to muffle the scream that would not be silenced. The blue man had killed him, squashed him like an insect all over her floor. And she was next. With a squeak, Maram leaped to her feet and bolted into the garden. She sank to her knees behind a shrub and hoped the shadows hid her from the blue man's sight. Moments passed and no one gave chase. She dared to breathe again. "Servant of the lamp, I command you to take this palace and everyone in it, and carry it to my homeland," the unfamiliar man ordered. "As you wish, master," boomed a voice that could only belong to the blue giant. Then the ground shook beneath Maram as though the palace had been hoisted on the back of a giant camel. She lost her balance, slamming her head against a tree, and darkness swallowed her whole. 28. Getting measured up by another man while wearing little more than a loincloth was a new sensation to Aladdin, and he wasn't sure he particularly liked it, but Maram would expect him to wear nice clothes to their wedding and probably afterwards too, so he resigned himself to getting used to spending more time at the tailor shop. Besides, wishing for clothes from the jinn seemed even stranger, for Aladdin had no idea where the clothing came from. He hoped the jinn used magic to create it, but what if he stole it from someone? The sultan or some other rich man might not notice a few missing tunics, but if he'd taken things from a merchant or tailor, that made Aladdin himself little better than a common thief. The two jinn had given him riches enough that he could afford to buy such things, so he should do so. Not to mention he was certain the tradesmen and merchants who had been his father's friends before he died, had provided charity to himself and his mother, a kindness he needed to repay. So if he'd ordered more tunics than he normally wore in a year, so what? He had the coin and they wanted the business. He hadn't ordered anything but his wedding clothes made in silk though, remembering the indecent way it had clung to him, especially when his desire for Maram had made him lose control. It would not happen again on their wedding day, he swore. He would be the picture of modest decorum. Though he was finding it increasingly hard to stay away from her, in every sense of the word. He might not have shared her bed yet, but she certainly shared his, dominating his dreams every night. Aladdin knew he would pay her a visit today, and this time he wasn't sure he could refuse her invitation to stay the night. Maram was intoxicating in all the best ways. Perhaps he would bring her a gift. He stopped in the bazaar to examine the caged birds, wondering which one she'd like. The jeweled garden would be better with some life in it. He wanted to get her a bird that would sing beautifully, but the only sound any of them seemed to want to make was a distressed peeping right now. A streak of gold shot between the cages and pounced on a loose thread that hung from the hem of his tunic. A cat, the tiniest he'd ever seen. Aladdin caught the kitten and held it up to better inspect it. The little creature battered at his turban until a fold came loose, then sank its needle-like teeth into the corner. "How much for this ferocious beast?" Aladdin asked the merchant who owned the menagerie. "If you can keep the little menace from killing my exotic birds, you may have it as a gift," the man said. "I keep the mother for the mice, but she has so many babies, I fear the city will soon be overrun." Aladdin tossed him a coin anyway, then tucked the kitten inside his tunic, where it promptly curled up and went to sleep. Now he had to go to see Maram, before her present woke up and clawed through his clothes. Unable to wipe the grin from his face, Aladdin set off for the palace. "Stop! Are you Prince Aladdin?" a voice demanded. It was on the tip of his tongue to tell the truth and deny it, but Aladdin knew he had little to fear from the Sultan's guards now. Why, he would soon marry the man's daughter. "I am he said grandly. 2 guards took his arms. "Then you must come with us. The Sultan commands it." They marched him the shortest way to the Sultan's palace, away from Maram. Aladdin sighed. She would understand, surely. The guards released him without warning, dropping him on the tiles of the Sultan's audience chamber. Instead of getting up, Aladdin merely bowed deeply. "How may I serve your Majesty?" "You can tell me where my daughter and her palace are." Aladdin wanted to laugh, but he restrained himself. "Her palace is beside your own, and no doubt Her Highness Princess Maram is inside it." The Sultan made an exasperated sound. "Show him." Aladdin's guards hauled him to his feet, and half carried him out of the hall to the gates of his palace. Or where the gates of his palace should be. Where the palace had stood only yesterday, now there was only bare earth, compressed under the weight of the absent palace. One of the jinn had turned it invisible, Aladdin decided, reaching for the gate he knew had to be there. But his fingers closed around nothing but air. He didn't resist as the guards dragged him back to the Sultan and left him on the floor. Her servants tell hysterical tales of giants and magicians and blazes that smoke and do not burn. Complete nonsense, for something has driven them all mad and made them run from my daughter's service. But they all agree on one thing: she was in the palace when they left, and now there is no sign of the princess or her palace. "Tell me where they are," the Sultan demanded. Aladdin raised his head. "I do not know." "Tell me, or I shall instruct my guards to cut off your head. Last night, I bade good night to my daughter in that very palace you caused to be built overnight. Today, the palace is gone. My daughter is gone. And so is the vizier's son, Hassan. No one else can tell me how a palace can appear in a night, and disappear just as quickly. Can you?" "Magic," Aladdin croaked. He swallowed, attempting to moisten his suddenly dry throat, then said it again. No one could do such a thing without magic. Was Hassan some sort of magician, who'd somehow stolen both the palace and Maram? If he had, Aladdin had to find her. The palace didn't matter, but Maram, she could not be left to the mercies of the man who had none. "Are you a magician?" the Sultan thundered. "No," Aladdin admitted. "Do you know what the punishment is for stealing from your sovereign?" Aladdin did not, but he was sure he wouldn't like it. "Your Majesty, I have stolen nothing from you. In fact, I am as incensed as you. Someone has stolen my palace and the woman I love. I ask for your leave to hunt down this thief, so that I may bring him to justice. Give me a month, and if I cannot find him, you may do as you wish with me." "Why should I trust you? If I release you now, what assurance do I have that you will return in a month, or at all?" Aladdin met the Sultan's eyes steadily. "Because, Your Majesty, if I do not find her in that time, then I fear Princess Maram will be dead, and I will beg you to die so that I might join her." The Sultan was silent for a long moment before he finally said, "Very well. But if you fail to return my daughter to me, you will not need to beg. Your death will be painful, I promise you." "Thank you, Your Majesty." The words came out of his mouth, but Aladdin's thoughts were not in the Sultan's palace at all. Instead, they were with Maram, wherever she might be. He prayed Hassan had not hurt her yet, and that Aladdin would be in time to save her from him. He had to be. 29. Maram woke in her own bed, her head throbbing as though she'd attended one of those all-night feasts the northern kingdoms loved so much. The ones where wine flowed like water. But if she had attended such a feast, there would be a naked man in her bed, and she would be wearing a lot less than she was now. Instead, she was alone, wearing the same clothes she'd worn yesterday. All she was missing was her shoes. She rose and called for her servants but received no answer. In fact, the palace was strangely quiet, as though she was alone, yet she could see daylight filtering through the windows. Her staff were never lazy, they would not be abed at this hour. One of her maids should have woken her hours ago. Something was terribly wrong. Maram crept out into the garden, which sparkled in the sun as though nothing had changed. She knew otherwise though, touching her head where it hurt most. She'd hit her head on a tree. This morning, the trunk was marked with a streak of blood that had blackened in the sun. Maram had not imagined the events of last night. That meant Hassan was. She swallowed and squared her shoulders. She had to see it again to be sure. Her feet made almost no sound as she traversed the cool tiles to the entrance hall. Her eyes scanned the floor for the spot where Hassan had fallen. Where he'd splattered. Her stomach roiled, but Maram refused to let the nausea rule her. His body had been right there, yet now the tiles were clean of blood and brains and whatever else was supposed to stay inside a man's head when he was alive. She had not imagined it, Maram told herself. Perhaps that's where the servants were, called to her father's court to bear witness to the body they'd found. She should join them, for she'd seen the blue man kill Hassan with her own eyes. Not that her father would believe there was such a thing as a giant blue man made of smoke. Maram herself didn't believe it, but if there had been some magic at work, then perhaps such a thing could exist. Such magic was beyond her though. She returned to her apartments and dressed carefully, for she had no servants to help her. No matter. She managed, as she always did. With one final pat to make sure her veil was in place, Maram marched to the gate. She crossed the entrance hall without faltering, maintaining a steady trot as she descended the sunlit stairs into air that seemed distinctly cooler than usual. Only when she reached the bottom of the stairs did she dare to look up into the street outside the palace gates. But the street was gone. In its place, endless grassland stretched to the horizon, the straight line broken by a few scrubby trees. This was not the city or the desert she knew, it was somewhere else entirely, a country Maram, even in her extensive travels, had never visited before. She heard a squeak, which drew her gaze back from the horizon to the gates. Someone's dogs were nosing something in the grass, so she took a step closer to investigate. One of the dogs heard her, for it lifted its bloodied muzzle and mewed at her. It was the strangest dog she'd ever seen. Why, it sounded almost like... A loud roar drowned out whatever thought she'd intended to have, as a larger creature rose from the grass. This Maram could identify. The lioness was leaner than the ones she'd seen in menageries across the world, but there was no mistaking the deadly intent in her eyes as she stalked. She appeared to be hunting, and the dogs were not dogs at all but lion cubs, eating the remains of Hassan. If she'd had anything in her belly, Maram would have brought it up then and there. She had no right to feel faint at the thought of someone killing the man, not when she'd been ready to hire an assassin to do the job for her, Maram told herself, but it was no use. Even she would have seen that the man was given a proper burial, not fed to someone's pet lions. Except, there was something wild about this lioness that made her take another look. No chains or collars bound them. No fence or walls caged them. The lioness and her cubs were free as the air, which meant there was nothing stopping them from. Maram scrambled up the steps, not daring to take her eyes off the lioness. She backed inside the palace, fingers scrabbling at the door so that she might shut it firmly behind her. Were there bars? Something to keep the lioness out? You should not leave the palace, princess. It is not safe. Maram whirled, pressing her back to the door. Who is there? A figure stepped out of the shadows, then bowed. I did not mean to frighten you. The light coming through the windows hit him and stole Maram's breath in the same moment. Are you going to kill me too, like you killed Hassan? She demanded of the blue man. He commanded me to protect you, the man said. As she watched, he shrank until he was almost the size of an ordinary man. Hassan deserved his fate. She didn't argue. She, more than anyone, knew what Hassan was capable of. Perhaps the blue man was right. The blue man swallowed. You look just like her. Only more beautiful. How is that even possible? Maram knew only one woman who looked like her. How do you know my mother? She demanded, looking him in the eye for the first time. Only then did she falter, for recognition came as a shock. Wait, Amani? He bowed his head. What are you doing here? I am the slave of the lamp, which your betrothed kindly brought back to the city. Aladdin? Amani smiled faintly. So that is his name. We were never properly introduced, and the enslavement spell on me is so strong I'm not sure I could call him anything but my master anyway. He is a good man, a rare thing in these times, though I hope you will not be disappointed to discover that he is not a prince. Maram wet her lips. I already know. I met him before he left the city and found— Wait, did you say a lamp? She lifted her gaze to the alcove where Aladdin had placed his lucky lamp, but now the alcove was empty. Where is it? He will be terribly disappointed that it is gone. Gwandoya the magician carries it with him, close to his heart. He is my master now, not Aladdin, though I wish it were otherwise. Gwandoya's desires run darker than Aladdin's simple tastes, and I fear what dark purpose he will use me for. Use you? Maram ran through what Amani had told her, as well as her father, about his punishment for being the queen's lover. Wait, you are a jinn, the servant of the lamp. No, the slave of the lamp, and your master is the man who ordered you to kill Hassan. Amani nodded. I let him believe Hassan was your husband. I'm not sure he can tell the difference between him and Aladdin. The man is clearly mad. Where are we? I am not sure what country this is, but we are many miles south from your home, far from any city. Maram slumped. So there is nowhere to escape to, even if the gates were not guarded by lions. The only way you will ever go home is if you persuade Gwandoya to order me to transport you, or the palace back to your city. Amani smiled sadly. If you have any of your mother's wiles to match her beauty, then I am sure you know how to make a man do whatever you wish. Amani had known her as a child, so he had no idea how many men she'd seduced, all for her father's benefit and the good of the kingdom. What was one more if it meant going home to Aladdin? It would be a betrayal of Aladdin, and the freedom he had won for her. She had promised herself to him and to let any other man touch her. Maram shivered. No, she could not even feign pleasure in any man's touch but his. Aladdin was the only man she wanted now, and she would not betray him with another, even if it meant their wedding would be delayed. She would return to him somehow. There had to be a way. A way that did not involve seducing a madman. 30. Have you seen the palace that was here yesterday? Aladdin asked. It was here, but now it's gone. When the man shook his head, Aladdin tried another passerby. Did you see anything here last night? People shook their heads and moved away from him, eyeing him suspiciously as they passed on the other side of the road. Aladdin couldn't really blame them. After all, if he'd been confronted by a desperate man asking if he'd seen his palace, Aladdin might have thought him a madman too. And it wasn't the palace he cared about as much as Maram. If Hassan had hurt her, he didn't know what he'd do. He kept his head down as he ambled through the bazaar, not wanting to look at all the things he'd thought about buying for Maram. Aladdin? Is it really you? It took a moment for the sound of his name being called to penetrate through Aladdin's wretchedness, and it took another long moment before he raised his head to focus on the man calling. "Burke?" Burke grinned. "We all thought the madman had killed you like Bugra. Ah, you should have waited, for there was work enough for all of us earlier this week. Some foreign prince came to court one of the Sultan's daughters, and he needed porters to carry his treasures through the city before he made them a gift to the Sultan. Never have you seen such riches. Gold and jewels and all manner of precious things. He paid handsomely too. So handsomely we hope he leaves soon and needs our help again. That much coin would feed my family for a year." "Did you see what happened to his palace?" Aladdin asked, hardly daring to hope. Burke scratched his head, then righted his turban. "Not me. But one of Rasul's boys might have. They watch the place all day, ready to fetch the prince a porter if he needs one." "All day? What about all night?" Burke shrugged. "The boys go home for dinner after dark. Now their father can afford it." Aladdin's heart sank. The boys wouldn't have seen anything if they weren't there. "Hey Rasul. Did your boys see anything strange about the prince's palace yesterday?" Burke shouted. Rasul shrugged. "Ghulam said he saw a big nobleman go in to visit the prince. He challenged him, he said, shouting terrible things. Ghulam came running home, telling us we must help the prince fight the man off, or we would not see the prince again. As if the prince did not have his own guards to deal with such things." "Hassan. It had to be him." "Did your boy see what happened to the palace?" Aladdin asked eagerly. Rasul shook his head. His mother had already made the evening meal. He stayed home to eat, like a good boy. He reflected for a moment, then added, "I hope the prince had guards. He pays better than the noblemen of this city. I would be disappointed if we don't see him again." Burke clapped Aladdin on the shoulder. "Aladdin's the one we didn't think we'd see again. When he went off with that Gwandoya, we thought he'd be as doomed as the rest of them. Especially after Gwandoya came back without him, trying to get more of us to work for him. Yet here he is, safe and well. What sort of work did that madman want you to do, Aladdin? Was it as dangerous as we thought?" Aladdin managed a smile. "Treasure hunting in the desert. So dangerous, when I got trapped, he left me for dead. I barely made it back. Whatever you do, don't agree to work for him. I was lucky to make it out alive from that place." Burke nodded gravely. "I told you not to. None of us is that crazy. Although, I haven't seen him for the last couple of days. Have any of you?" The other men shook their heads. "Huh. Maybe he has a new employee to go treasure hunting for him. Hey, did you find anything?" If he told the truth, every man here would head out into the desert to their deaths. Aladdin forced out a laugh. "Nothing but an old, tarnished lamp. Pity. We could all do with a change in fortune." Burke sighed. "Ah well. When the prince leaves, make sure you're around. We'll tell him to hire you too." Aladdin thanked Burke, farewelled his friends, and headed home. His mother was waiting for him. "What happened?" she demanded. "I heard some guards arrested you and took you to the palace. I told you, only evil could come of messing with princesses and jinn. Jinn would try to trick the Sultan himself out of his crown, just for the fun of it. Or make his palace invisible. Or..." That's how Hassan had done it. He'd somehow learned of the jinn that lived in the lamp, and enslaved him to his will. If the servant of the lamp could make a palace appear in a night, then surely he could make it disappear just as easily. He'd probably tried to keep Maram for himself. Aladdin found his mother staring at him as though expecting a reply. "You are wiser than I will ever be, Maman," he said warmly. He dug into his purse for his few remaining coins. How about buying us a meal fit for a sultan tonight? I saw some new, exotic fruits in the bazaar this morning. She looked slightly mollified. Wrapping her veil around her hair and face, she bade him farewell and headed out. Aladdin let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. "Kaveh, I need your help," he said. The dejected jinn appeared beside him. "Before you ask, no, I can't bring your palace back, and as long as the other jinn has her, I can't bring your princess back either. He's far more powerful than me." Aladdin digested his words for a long moment before he said, "But you know where Maram and the palace are?" Kaveh nodded. "In Gwandoya's homeland, deep in the savannah." "Is Maram all right?" If she was, then nothing else mattered. "I do not know." "Take me to her," Aladdin said. Kaveh threw his hands up in the air. "I told you I am not as powerful as he is. Before he became a jinn, he was a powerful enchanter. One who knew portal magic and all manner of spells I have only heard of. I open doors and make things invisible. Even if I could get you there, what then? I am no match for the servant of the lamp. He will defeat me and you, and then what will become of your princess? Better to die than to stay here and do nothing. If we cannot reach her by magical means, there must be another way. I have a month to find her and bring her home, or I will die at the hands of the Sultan's executioner. Better to die trying to save her. And if I do, I ask only one more thing of you: deliver my head to the Sultan, with my humblest apologies for my failure." Kaveh stared at him. "If that is your wish, master." "It is." 31. Once again I must remind you, princess. Your husband is dead, and I am the only man you will ever see again. Will you finally accept me as your new husband? Gwandoya asked. Maram shook her head. I cannot marry as long as I am in mourning. It is not seemly for me to take a new husband so soon. Who is there to know or care? We are alone here. Gwandoya snapped. As long as my late husband's shade haunts me, unable to find peace in the place where he was murdered, I cannot think to replace him. Gwandoya jumped to his feet. A pox on your husband's shade. Would that he were still alive, so that I might kill him more slowly, for he is such a thorn in my side that he deserves pain in equal measure. He gestured for Amani. I have had enough. Send me back to the city. Gwandoya departed through the portal, leaving Maram alone with Amani. She sagged against the jinn. Each time I see him, I dislike him more, and I hated the man on sight. When will he give up? Amani shook his head. He is crazy in ways that few men are. He is not the sort to give up easily, or at all. The question you should be asking is, what will that madman do when he finally loses patience with you? I have no desire to harm you, but I am the slave of the lamp. Should he order me to kill you, I'm not sure I could disobey him. And your mother's shade would never forgive me. My mother is not dead. Amani's mouth dropped open. Briska lives? Maram had never seen a man look as hungry as Amani did now. She does. All my life I was told that she'd been executed, as had you, but it turns out my father couldn't bring himself to kill her. He loved her too, you know. She is enslaved to something just as you are, though I know not what or where. Only that she lives. One day I wish to be free to find her. Tears filled her eyes. I hope one day you find her too. You deserve to be happy. Your father would not think so. He will when I tell him how you have protected me here. If it weren't for you, I should have gone mad on that first day, or been eaten by a lion. It is 4 weeks since I arrived here, and you have never allowed me to lose hope that one day I might go home. Maram stared at him fiercely. When I see my father again, I will demand that he release you from slavery. Amani's smile seemed pitying. He cannot, princess. It takes magic to break a magical binding. She refused to be put off. Then I will make him summon an enchanter powerful enough to break it for him. If I have to endure another day here alone. But you are not alone, princess. Not anymore. Open the gates and see. Maram followed Amani to the entrance hall, where he threw open the doors and pointed. Look out over the grass, he said. In the darkness she could see very little, but there did seem to be a faint glow growing larger as she watched. Maram squinted. There appeared to be two figures, each carrying a torch. Who are they? Amani's enigmatic smile told her nothing. Wait and see. It took an eternity for the two men to cross the flat plain to the gates. Maram didn't dare go out to meet them. In the weeks she'd been here, wild animals had picked Hassan's bones clean, and the bleached bones outside the gate were a warning of what the lions would do to her if she tried to leave. The night breeze plucked at her veil, chilling Maram, but she simply folded her arms across her breasts and hugged what warmth she had left. If she went back into the palace for a shawl, the visitors might disappear, never to be seen again. Finally, the figure came close enough for Maram to discern details. One man, not two, and he was cloaked against the cold, carrying a torch to light his way. What's that? A familiar voice asked, lifting his torch to illuminate what remained of Hassan. Maram's heart leaped for joy. It was Hassan, she said, stepping forward out of the shadows. They killed him and gave his body to the lions. She could feel tears threatening to fall. I closed the doors, but I could still hear the bones cracking while they ate him. I have never been so alone as I am here. Then he comes at night and tries to seduce me. After I saw him kill Hassan. Aladdin set his torch in the bracket by the gate, and ascended the steps. You are safe now, he said, wrapping his arms around Maram. I swear it. Maram couldn't help it. Safe in his arms, she wept. For the senseless slaughter, the frustration of her own captivity, and most of all, for how much she'd missed this man. Everything will be all right. Tonight we shall rest here, and on the morrow I shall take you home, Aladdin soothed. Amani cleared his throat. You may go where you will, but the princess cannot leave. A sob escaped from Maram, and the tears fell faster. Please don't leave me, Aladdin. I cannot bear to be alone here again. I won't leave without you. Never had the sensation of someone stroking her hair felt so exquisite. My master will return tomorrow night, and if he finds you, he will command me to kill you like Hassan there, Amani said. But I am the master of the lamp, Aladdin said. Not anymore, Amani said. Gwandoya is my master now. And unlike you, he keeps the lamp safe on his person at all times, not in some alcove where anyone could see and steal it. But who would steal an old lamp? Amani sounded disapproving. Anyone who knows its true worth. To have a powerful sorcerer like me at their command is something many would kill for. Gwandoya has already killed many men to get his hands on that lamp, and I was nearly one of them. There is no telling what he will do with such power. Aladdin sounded determined. We must get it back. Nothing will make him surrender something so precious while he lives. Maram raised her head and wiped her eyes. Then Gwandoya must die. I won't let him kill Aladdin. Princess, both men began. She held up a hand to silence them. I know I am not a fighter. I am a diplomat. But I have other weapons, and I'll be damned if I let him win. Tomorrow Gwandoya will die, and then I will get to go home. Are you with me? It took several hours and all Maram's powers of persuasion to get Aladdin and Amani to agree to her plan, but they did. The moon had reached its zenith, turning the jeweled garden into a sparkly paradise, as Amani took the hint, and left her alone with Aladdin. There were no tears when they came together this time, only kisses and increasingly urgent caresses. "Make love to me," Maram begged. She, who had never begged a man for anything in her life. "When we are safely home and wed," Aladdin promised, stealing her breath with another kiss. "No," she insisted. "Tomorrow anything could happen. Either of us could die, or he might escape with the lamp and leave us here, stranded. Tomorrow is uncertain, but I need to spend tonight in your arms." She expected him to argue more, but all he said was, "As you wish, princess." Hardly daring to believe her luck, Maram led him to her bedchamber, where she eagerly peeled off her clothes. She turned, wanting to feast her eyes on Aladdin's body before she touched him. She had waited a long time for this. "Why aren't you undressed?" she asked. Stepping forward, she seized the hem of his tunic. "Here, let me help you." Gently he pried her hands off his clothes. "No, princess. I made you a promise, and I intend to keep it. I swore I would set you free from your slavery, and I will. Your body is not a plaything for men to use for their own pleasure. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and you deserve more, far more, than I can ever give. I love you, and I will take whatever pleasure you are willing to give me when you are free. Which you will never be until we are wed." "But you said—" He gathered her up in his arms and carried her to the bed. Then he lay beside her, pulling her body against his, wrapping one arm around her breasts while his other hand rested on her belly. "I will hold you in my arms like I said, and for now I will be content." She squirmed. "And if I am not? What about what I want?" She seized his hand from her belly and guided it between her thighs. "I want you, Aladdin. I am wet with anticipation, wanting the pleasure I will only feel when you are inside me." His free arm tightened around her breasts. "Are you sure?" His voice was hoarse in her ear. "Of course." The words had barely left her lips before his fingers speared deep inside her, stroking all the right spots to make her gasp. "More?" "Oh yes." He hooked his leg around hers, anchoring her more firmly to his body as his fingers worked what could only be described as magic. One perfectly placed circle of his thumb tipped her over the edge, sobbing his name. He kissed the back of her neck. "Are you satisfied now, princess?" "Never," she declared, then squeaked as his fingers moved within her once more, stroking passion-inflamed flesh to another irresistible climax. She bucked, but he held her firmly in his arms, intent on her pleasure, even as he ignored his own growing arousal digging into her back. "You want me. I can feel it." He laughed softly. "I don't just want you. I love you, and I desire you so much it hurts. But the only pleasure I will take in your bed tonight is yours." Again his fingers stroked her, finding her most intimate places and making them sing. Until. "Aladdin, oh how I love you," she screamed. 32. Something has changed. "You are not as dejected as you were yesterday," Gwandoya greeted Maram, eyeing her with suspicion. No woman could be dejected after a night experiencing the magic Aladdin could work with his fingers. The thought of what he might do with the rest of his body and hers was more than a little distracting. Not to mention frustrating, for he refused to give her more yet. That's why she'd spent the day leafing through the scrolls and books among her mother's things, looking for more information on jinn enslavement. After all, her mother had been a witch too, with powers as limited as Maram's own. "I miss having a man in my bed," she said honestly. "I have decided it is time to look to the future, and what you can give me. I have no maidservants here, and I have not had a new gown in weeks." Gwandoya's eyebrows rose, but as she spoke more fervently about maids and gowns, the suspicion in his expression slipped away. The man almost smiled. He clapped his hands. "This calls for a betrothal feast. Bring us plenty of food and wine, for we will need it while we discuss our wedding." Amani bowed and disappeared. Off to get what Gwandoya had asked for, no doubt. And what she had asked for too. Maram braced herself for what would be the biggest negotiation of her life. As she and Gwandoya argued the terms of a marriage she had no intention of entering into. Servants and jewels, palaces and gowns, for Gwandoya boasted that Amani could build her a palace anywhere she wanted, made of anything she pleased. In the middle of Maram's lengthy deliberation of whether to have a stone castle far in the north, surrounded by blackberry hedges, or a palace like this one overlooking the sea, Amani brought a jug of wine. The finest vintage from the Sultan's own vineyards, which have lain in his cellar for more than a century, Amani announced, pouring cups for them both. Maram's eyes lit up. "Ooh, is this the wine I told you about?" Amani bowed. "Yes, Princess, it is." She sipped and scrunched up her face. The opium tasted as bitter as she had expected. It does have a bite to it. Keeping it in a cellar for a century must do that, I suppose. But there is no better wine to toast our union with. She lifted her cup. "To our health and happiness, my lord." Gwandoya preened, probably at the unearned title. He lifted his own cup. "To our health and happiness indeed." He drained his cup, then smacked his lips appreciatively. "'Tis strong stuff. Too strong for a woman, especially one who is about to become my obedient wife and bear my sons." He snatched up her cup and drained that too, before commanding Amani to pour more for himself alone. "We shall start tonight." Maram stared at him in shock. His calculating eyes regarded her over the rim of his cup as he gulped more wine, daring her to object. Obedience had been one of the things she'd traded for, something. If it meant he drank more of the drugged wine, then she would not argue. "Yes, my lord," she said, ducking her head in fake submission. An idea struck her. "I have the perfect idea for my wedding gown. I would like 7 layers of silk." She described in excruciating detail one of the gowns she'd seen on the Queen of Beacon Isle, changing her mind about the color only to return to the original shade as she saw Gwandoya's eyelids drooping. "Sleep, you mad bastard," she thought, pasting a smile on her face as she began a long debate about the merits of the exquisitely detailed painted shoes in Kashmiris compared to the silk slippers found in the bazaars closer to home. A good embroiderer can do just an intricate design with thread as a painter can with pigment, but there are few painters in Kashmiris who are talented enough anymore. The royal family has a pair of christening shoes that have been in their family for generations, the most beautiful pair I have ever seen. Gwandoya's head flopped forward into a bowl of the bugs he liked so much. "My lord?" she inquired. "Gwandoya?" She called his name several times before gesturing for Amani to check him. She had no intention of touching him. Amani eased Gwandoya's face out of the bowl and laid him on the floor. "He sleeps but he still draws breath," Amani reported. May heaven forgive her, but she had not been able to bring herself to kill the man, even with poison. Maram breathed out a sigh of relief. "Bring me the lamp." Amani folded his arms across his chest and shook his head. "I cannot." His tone softened. "A new master of the lamp must take it from the old. I cannot choose who I serve." "Fine." She rose and leaned over Gwandoya's sleeping form. The detestable man let out a loud snore. She reached into his tunic and pulled it from the grimy pocket where he kept it. Maram cradled the lamp in her clean hand while wiping the tainted one down the side of his tunic. Time to see if the old books were right. A cloud of smoke surrounded Amani as he swelled to his full height, the impressive bulk of a jinn greeting his new master for the first time. "What is your wish, mistress?" he boomed. "Take me and everyone and everything inside this palace, back home where we belong." Remembering the first time when she'd hit her head, she added, "As smoothly as possible please, so that no one feels a thing." "As you wish, mistress." She felt the movement, little more than the sway of a ship at sea, before a slight bump told her they had arrived. A peep out the window revealed the shadow of buildings as someone carrying a torch ambled down the street. Maram was home. "What else do you wish, mistress?" "I wish to be free to marry the one I love, to be no man's slave any more." Amani looked pained. "Princess, I cannot." Maram lifted her dagger from the table and sliced it across her hand. "I know. But I can. Blood of the betrayed that binds this gin, my father's blood that runs in my veins too, will set us both free." She seized the lamp in her bleeding hand, smearing the stuff over the blackened brass. "I am no man's mistress." Aladdin appeared. "Maram, no." She tossed the lamp at his feet. "Yes." She turned to Amani. "You are free. Find her, free her, and be happy." Tears filled Amani's eyes as, man-sized once more, he bowed at Maram's feet. "As you command, princess. When I find her, I will tell her that you have found happiness too. If you ever have need of me, you have only to call, and I will be there to grant your wish." He touched her hand, and she felt the cut heal as though it had never been. Only then did Amani rise and incline his head to Aladdin. "Enjoy your palace. Consider it my wedding gift to the princess. But if you ever hurt her, know you will incur the enmity of the most powerful enchanter in the world. A man with no master. Not any more." He stuck a finger in his mouth, withdrew it, then traced a circle in the air. A portal opened and he stepped through and was gone. "Why did you do that?" "He was a traitor. The enslavement was his punishment for crimes even we do not know." Aladdin's wild eyes reminded Maram of Gwandoya. "I know. His only crime was to love my mother and win her love in return. Neither of us deserves to be a slave, serving a master who might use us for ill." She took his hand. "Please understand." Aladdin swallowed. "I admit I do not, but there is very little about you I do understand. You are a great mystery to me, Princess Maram, but one I intend to spend my whole life studying. As long as your father doesn't kill me first." "Why would my father kill my husband to be?" "He gave me a month to bring you and this palace back, or he would cut off my head. Tomorrow is the last day of my month." Maram folded her arms. "Then we will see the Sultan now and sort this out. Next week is our wedding and I want you alive." Aladdin laughed. "I want you every bit as much as you want me, princess. As you wish it, so must it be. To the Sultan's palace we go." 33. Sleepy servants showed Aladdin and Maram to an audience chamber, promising to tell the Sultan of their arrival. Time ticked by with no sign of the Sultan as Maram dozed in Aladdin's arms, and he found he didn't mind being kept waiting. No matter how many times Aladdin told himself he wasn't worthy of any princess, let alone Maram, the rightness of her body against his was undeniable. And the way her body had responded to him last night, she genuinely wanted him. Him, Aladdin, the humble spinner's son, briefly the master of a lamp and its djinn, but now he was just a man in love, waiting to beg the Sultan to spare his life so that he might marry the man's favorite daughter. The first rays of sunlight entered the audience chamber before the Sultan marched in, his brow furrowed with annoyance. "What kind of man wants to be beheaded before I break my fast? If you weren't going to be executed today anyway, I would think up a suitable punishment for waking your Sultan too early." Aladdin's first instinct was to prostrate himself at the Sultan's feet, but that would mean waking Maram, so he did not move. Instead he said softly, "I know of no man who wishes to lose his head before you break your fast, your majesty. But I did not dare sleep until I had reported to you, as I promised." He stroked Maram's hair. "The princess made no such promise though, so perhaps we should let her rest." The Sultan's eyes widened. "You brought her back? Is she hurt?" "Not that I can tell, but she was kidnapped by a madman and held captive for weeks. There is no telling what he did to her." "Where is the madman now?" The Sultan demanded. In the dining hall of my palace, unconscious. Your Majesty is welcome to him, Aladdin said. The Sultan ordered 2 guards to bring Gwandoya back, then sat across from Aladdin and stared at him for a moment before he said, For saving her, I would offer you her hand in marriage if I had not already promised it to you. Much though Aladdin would have liked to be the hero, he knew he didn't deserve the title. She saved herself. She drugged her kidnapper's wine. The only reason she didn't do it earlier was because she did not think she could escape until I arrived. Your daughter is an amazing woman, and while I have no idea how I have managed to win her affection, I know I am the luckiest man alive. Indeed you are. She is everything a man could wish for but will never attain. The Sultan sighed. Just like her mother. Aladdin longed to ask for the Sultan to say more, but as the silence stretched between them, he could not bring himself to do so. Your Majesty, the man you wanted. The guards unceremoniously dumped Gwandoya on the floor. Wake him, the Sultan commanded grimly. The guards tried shaking him, slapping him, then throwing a bucket of water over the man, but still Gwandoya did not wake. Then one of the guards bent over him and pressed a hand to Gwandoya's chest, over his heart. After a moment, the guard shook his head. He's gone, Your Majesty. What do you mean? The Sultan asked. He's dead. Maram stirred. Serves him right for stealing my wine. She eyed Gwandoya's corpse. Far too easy a death for the man who kidnapped me and killed Hassan. Throw his body into the gutter, to be devoured by stray dogs. It is no better than he deserves. The Sultan sagged in relief at the sound of her voice. Whatever you wish, Maram. We will postpone this wedding until you are well, and you shall have your apartments here so that my guards can keep you from further harm. No. Maram struggled to sit up, then aimed a glare at her father. I will live in the palace my husband gave me with him, and I will marry him on the morrow. Anyone who seeks to steal Aladdin from me again will suffer a worse fate than him. She pointed at Gwandoya. The Sultan looked taken aback. Then slowly he said, Whatever you wish. 34. Maram had attended many feasts in her life, but she never wanted one to finish as much as her wedding feast. Courtiers gushing over her dress, fawning over Aladdin, or exclaiming over delicacies they had never tasted before barely registered in her thoughts, for all that occupied her mind was the man beside her. Finally, the Sultan commanded the guests to form a triumphal arch for the departing couple, and she and Aladdin were allowed to leave. She ran beside him as though her feet had wings through the arch and all the way home. Guards stood at the gates now, a gift from her father, but she had eyes for only one man. A man whose hand she held tight in her own as she led him to the best bedchamber, a room she had not entered until now. An enormous bed occupied most of it, piled with enough pillows and coverlets to sleep a small harem, for it was a bed fit for a king. Fit for her pretend prince and her, certainly. She paused only long enough to kiss Aladdin deeply before she started shedding her clothes, not stopping until the layers of silk and linen lay on the floor. She lifted her chin. Now you must make love to me, she said. He laughed. As my princess commands. She shook her head. I am not a princess anymore. Not truly. I am your wife and nothing more. She'd never felt so free. Finally, he tugged his tunic over his head and left it with her clothes. You are everything to me. A princess, a queen, a woman to worship. I would do anything for you, princess or no. She smiled. Then lie down. Her eyes drank in every inch of his naked body as he stretched out on the bed, his head pillowed on his folded arms as he stared straight back at her. Her husband was no soft courtier or over-muscled knight. No, he was lean and hard, with no extra flesh or muscle that a man did not need. I can't make love to you while I am here and you are over there, he said, beckoning. Come here, my beautiful wife, so that I can show you just how much I love you. She grinned and crawled across the bed, stalking like a lioness. 2 nights ago you had your turn. Now it is mine. With practiced ease and considerable pleasure, she straddled him, guiding him inside her until he filled her completely. Oh yes. This is what I've longed for. All those nights I dreamed. As did I. His hands curved around her hips, cupping her bottom as he drove deeper inside her. They moved together in perfect harmony, 2 parts of one glorious being, not stopping the first time she screamed his name, but when she felt her second climax building, he slowed. I cannot resist you any longer, Maram. I must. His words dissolved into a groan of pure pleasure as she clenched around him, catapulting her own body into another longed-for climax. When she caught her breath, she finished for him, we must do this every night we are together, for as long as we live. Aladdin laughed, stroking his fingers across her breast. You are stealing my wishes just as you have stolen my heart. She kissed him long and hard. Granting them more like. With Amani gone, all you have is me. The silver ring on his finger caught her nipple, sending a jolt through her. You are all I ever need. I have nothing left to wish for. She rose. I wish for a bath. Will you join me in the bathhouse? Only if you will grant a wish there that I have longed for since the day I met you. Making love to Aladdin in the water. Maram shivered in delicious anticipation. Now who's stealing wishes? He lifted her in his arms and carried her to the bathhouse, and Maram sighed blissfully, knowing there was nowhere else she would rather be and truly nothing else she could wish for. This has been Wish. Aladdin Retold. A Tale in the Romance, a Medieval Fairytale series. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Charlotte from Google.